So Loo Mun is from Line. She's one of their privacy experts, and she's going to be discussing GDPR, how we are tackling it at Line. So here's a real-world example of a huge social network. Line in Japan is actually larger than Facebook, and they've got a ton of privacy problems. Their social model is very, it's very Japanese, but it's very person-centric, which is really cool. So anyway, we'd love to hear what you have.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm not sure if you can see me when I'm standing here. And also, maybe I should stand a bit right here so that you can see me. So basically, thank you again, and good afternoon, and welcome to the Line and Intertrust Security Summit. And this is an hour where all your blood goes to your stomach for the food processing. So please bear with me for 25 minutes as I go through my presentation. So I would like to welcome you again. So my name is Loo Mun, and my surname is Chan. So you can call me Loo Mun or Chan. I'm a legal and privacy specialist, and I'm able to get by and communicate in 6 languages. So which I think is why I'm in charge of privacy impact assessment for Line Global Services. So it doesn't just include the messenger. It includes like shopping services, travel services, even something like Uber Eats too. So I basically is in charge of checking the privacy and identifying the privacy risks for the services. So by the end of the presentation today, I hope you will be able to understand and how at least one messaging application provider manages compliance with GDPR. So my talk today is divided into 2 parts. The first section, I will talk about Line's current data protection efforts and how they tie in with GDPR compliance. And second, I would like to focus on the challenges Line faced in going through this process and how we overcame them, actually how we are still overcoming them. So the first part, Line's privacy program. So before I go into details, I think I would need to talk a bit about Line. So what is Line? Line Messenger is a downloadable, globally available instant messaging application. So we have a timeline feature, and users can actually chat, receive information from official accounts, and also sending the cute stickers right on top of there. If you can see the little rabbit and the good sign. And also like posts and timelines and many other significant features. So Line Corporation is the publisher of the Line Messenger application. Line Corporation is incorporated in Japan, and our parent company, Naver Corporation, is based in Korea. In 2016, as mentioned earlier in the keynote speech by my CSO, Line Corporation completed our initial public offering and dual listing in Tokyo and New York Stock Exchange. Since the introduction of Line Messenger in Japan in 2011, Line has grown as a mobile communication channel and has users spread all around the world. Our top 4 markets are Japan, Taiwan, Indonesia. And the MAU for these 4 markets already comprises about 164 million and 77% of our user base. So I think it's fair to say that we are an Asian-based company with a strong user base in Asia. So who drives the Line privacy program? The position of Line privacy team, or we call ourselves information security team, is unique since we fall under the security department, while the legal department is a totally separate department. Our team is structured this way since we view privacy as not just a legal and compliance issue, but as fulfilling a role that requires individuals with engineering backgrounds to efficiently develop a privacy program and to identify and respond to ongoing related issues. So we are an eclectic teams of individuals coming from a diverse background, like legal, technical, engineering, and even a legislative and bureaucratic roles. So what constitutes the Line privacy program? This was also mentioned earlier in the presentation in the morning, but I would just want to emphasize on this again, that at Line, we make it our origin task to protect users' privacy and to shape our program based on these three main pillars of compliance, outreach, and empowerment. So what all these three pillars means to us? For compliance, it means understanding and staying ahead of the laws and regulations related to the collection, processing, deletion, and protection of personal data, providing insight into this perspective for Line as an organization. Empowerment means, of course, to provide users the means to make informed decisions about privacy and allowing them to manage their privacy. Outreach here means educating the public about Line's protection effort and also influencing the privacy standards in Japan and major markets where Line is available, like Taiwan and also Indonesia. And lastly, it also includes learning about thoughts and impressions of Line users, and also the experiences of privacy experts in the academia. So the focus of my talk today will be compliance. So as I would like to outline how Line handles compliance with GDPR. So what do we exactly cover under our privacy compliance? The main laws and regulations that we run compliance checks on are personal data protection laws, consent transfer, storage, deletion, security requirements, for example, under cybersecurity laws. Line is also registered as a telecommunication provider in Japan. So this means that we have to adhere to the telecommunication-related laws in Japan that requires us to uphold that the communication between users are not to be intercepted. And this ties in place with the EU and Japan mutual adequacy decision, which I will explain later in my presentation. We also help to identify and manage reputational risks arising from business activities involving use of personal data. As you all know here, adhering to the law itself is not sufficient. Sometimes there's more of an ethical thing that we must do to protect the user's privacy. And lastly, our team is also in charge to judge on whether requests from law enforcement agencies for personal data disclosures are adequate and not overreaching. So I would like to ask the audience here, what do you think is the biggest challenge of an application company? Any hands? Getting more users? No. But thank you. The consolidation price, okay. So Line Messenger is an application available worldwide, which means we have to be in compliance with laws and regulations for all the countries that we are available in. That's the basic concept. But to be frank, it would be impossible to be in full 100% compliance with the ever-changing laws and regulations of more than 200 countries. Not to mention, like some countries, they have their subnational legal system, like the US and also Germany. Furthermore, even if it was possible to do that, it would certainly not be cost-effective. So there's a limit to the number of issues that we can handle effectively and at 100% compliance. So while we are aware that it would be ideal to be in compliance with all countries' laws and regulations where our app is available and at all times, as a practical matter, we have taken a risk-based approach towards managing the different legal requirements. So to identify the countries, we must then prioritize with respect to compliance. So we look into our areas of risk. So for Line, we have mapped out our number of users based on the proportional share of the population, also looking into whether we have physical offices in those places, and whether or not, for example, certain entities are publicly listed or not. We also considered factors like our server location and the fact that our three other major markets are Taiwan, Thailand, and Indonesia, and our main business development activity is in Korea. Additionally, we took into consideration countries where the legislation, litigation risks are high, like the US, where Line stock is publicly listed, and where sanction risks are high, like the EU. In summary, we identified the laws of certain countries with which we must aim for full compliance and then factor in a sort of a globally set of standard of data protection regulations. With all this in mind, we created our own unified standard, and we use an internal point system where we aim for a total of 90 points. This also means that sometimes our standard is stricter than certain countries' minimum level of requirements required by certain countries. For example, Thailand and Indonesia, where there's still no data protection legislation in place. It has been ongoing for a year, and still we don't see when the law will come into place. In situations where 100% compliance would impose disproportionate costs and burdens, our business team has actually been advised to drop certain functions and features. Therefore, to manage the different requirements under each data protection regime, we have also divided our privacy policy out by country and services. So to sum up the characteristics of our compliance approach, we map out all the laws and regulations on data protection to identify the global standards and outliers. We then use this risk map to create a privacy impact assessment checklist to guide our team in conducting PIAs, otherwise known as data protection impact assessment. And since we rely on a single standard for our PIAs, we can ensure consistency throughout our team. I believe earlier in this morning, Dave presented about PIAs, but it is mostly used for high-risk services. But for us at Line, we basically require all services, new features, or updates, or campaigns, even campaigns, to go through the PIA process before release. In other words, without going through a PIA, a release cannot be approved. This also means that we require business team to send us their plans for review at early planning stage so that we can ensure that privacy by design is being reflected in the development process. So the second part of my talk will focus on GDPR and for Line Messenger app. As I'm sure everyone in the audience here is well aware, GDPR is an advanced data protection legislation regime, probably the most advanced in the world. So it recognizes data privacy as a human right, which this perspective is a bit different from the Japan's Personal Information Protection Act, which we believe the Japanese Act could learn many things from the GDPR. So the GDPR has become the gold standard, with India and Brazil adopting elements, and we believe many other countries will follow suit sooner or later. And actually in Thailand, they are actually incorporating GDPR elements in their newest draft for the data protection legislation. So our conclusion that over time, GDPR has the highest chance to become the global standard for global data protection led us to spend more than 2 years to ensure compliance with GDPR. Even though our actual user base in Europe is not a large proportion of our user base, as I mentioned earlier. 77% of our users are Asian-based. So the main characteristic of Line's compliant approach is privacy risk map, privacy management standard, and also the privacy impact assessment process. This risk-based approach and privacy design are already rooted in the culture of the company. So, contrary to public perception that there might be some resistance in investing time and money into GDPR compliance, we did not face resistance from Line's management. We also obtained cooperation and support from business side to make changes to certain features of Line Messenger, which I will elaborate more later in my presentation. So it's fairly easy for us to say that Line is one of the make user privacy a high priority, and we did not incur major costs when making changes to our compliance, as we already have a fairly risk-averse and maintain high standard in data privacy. However, it is still not all smooth sailing for us. We underwent intensive analysis to identify gaps and potential gaps. I would now like to share 3 of the major challenges faced by Line, resulting from how our service is structured and how we overcame those challenges. The 3 major challenges are all listed here: SNS-specific functions, users' region determination, local specification, which means managing multiple jurisdiction issues at the same time. Previously, I explained that Line Messenger allows users to chat and share posts on their timeline, and also sending all those cute stickers. So the first challenge is related to the central feature of SNS, which allows 2 individuals to communicate with each other. unlike a traditional mobile phone where a user is identified only by a mobile phone number, Line Messenger and other messaging applications alike, like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, allows the users to create a profile name and upload a display image. So this type of information are considered to be open information, and Line also has a timeline feature where a user can make postings. So the issue we face here is to struggle to sort out, would a user looking at the profile information of another user constitute processing? Would it also then constitute cross-border processing if the other user is not located within the EU? If so, would we then need to sign a data processing agreement with standard contractual clauses with all the users? And second, would allowing a user to contact with another user constitute processing? And third one, would a picture of me uploaded by my friend constitute my personal data or my friend's personal data, or is it both? And regarding the interaction between a company official accounts and a user, we are once again faced with the issue of determining whether the exchange of messages between the official accounts company and also Line users constitute processing. Basically, what we struggle on is whether we are correctly understanding the law, including understanding a specific definition of various key terms under GDPR, determining the legal basis of the words legitimate interest, performance of contract, consent for Line's processing activities that are SNS-based. And determining the region of the user is important to us, since legal issues like copyright of stickers sold online may arise, and there are businesses that needs for certain functions to be limited to particular region. And this brings me to another area that we struggled over, which was determining exactly which users should be covered by GDPR. While it sounds simple to say that the territorial scope covers users who are located in the EEA, you then need to ask, how do we actually define a user's region? At Line, our usual process of determining the region of the users is relying on the device information of the users during registration. However, certain users, although they are located in the EEA, may not be covered if we are just relying on that usual process. Therefore, the step we took is to determine a user's region by looking in the current registration information, which is based on the user's device. And even if the user is not physically located in the EEA, we assume that GDPR applies. And if you are aware, GDPR basically says that if a user is physically located in the EEA, he or she should be covered. Secondly, so if the user is physically located in the EEA, we are looking, even if the registration information does not point to that person being an EEA user, we are working to grant them rights under GDPR. And similar to all multinational companies, and unlike Google and Facebook where they have a very big task force, here, another main issue is managing the different requirements under GDPR and other data protection regime. Thus, the third challenge we face with the challenge of whether Line to make compliance with GDPR the de facto minimum standard for all Line services worldwide, or treat it as more of a local specification. First one, the tricky topic regarding children. So what comes here is that different countries, as you all know here, stipulate different age limitations and legal requirements. Under Japan's civil law, for example, the legal age of adulthood is 20 years old. And just as a cultural illustration, the problem of dating and minors is a large and sensitive social problem in Japan. And this is a central reason why companies are especially careful about checking the users' ages, in contrast with EU and US, where that may not be quite a sensitive issue, at least legally speaking. In the US, under the COPPA, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, the minimum age here is 13 years old. And parental consent is required when we are supposed to provide SNS functions to children. And contrary with GDPR, the minimum age here now is 16 years old, and children require special protections when we are collecting and processing their personal data. Looking at the different minimum ages and legal requirements and cultural differences, it is difficult to incorporate a unified approach for users or global sale. And we had to balance the legal requirements and pressures and demands from the business side too. If we are to set it as 16 years old, which will mean that for all our applications, it will mean cutting off users who are between 13 and also 15, which are our target audience in the US. So this is the balance that we have to check. And in so, we have set up local specification for Japan, the US, GDPR territories to match the appropriate requirements. Next one here, profiling and targeted advertisement. So GDPR sets a high standard with regards to the processing of users' data for profiling and targeted advertisement. And business team may naturally want to maintain line messenger presence within the EU. However, looking at the revenue and the number of EU users compared to our 4 major markets, the relative compliance cost would seem too high, and not to mention a potential 4% penalty on our worldwide annual revenues is extremely high. Therefore, certain features like profiling and targeted advertisement on line messenger has been restricted from the EU market. By way of background, this line of thought is not new to Line, as we have taken an approach where user base is not all that high. The business model is one where sticker sales is one against being relied upon rather than targeted advertisement. So I would like the help of all of you here today. If you are to help us to spread the use of Line Messenger, if the number of the EU users increases again, we will look into opening the features again. And as for services that are not marketed to the EU, we look into the user needs and also the status of data protection legislation to decide on whether to rule out GDPR compliance needs. And the last part here is the EU and Japan mutual adequacy decision. And with this decision in place, there comes an additional guideline that Japan has to follow with regards to the handling of EU user personal data. While we do not expect many changes, as we are already working on being compliant with the GDPR, there are certain requirements unique to Japan Personal Information Protection Act, which will also be applicable to the EU users. For example, the requirements to record transfer of data to third parties is not present in the GDPR. This means if a business partner is in the EU, we would have to give them the protection as they would under the Japan Personal Information Protection Act, which require the data controller, which means us, to make a record of cases where personal data is transferred for the use of the third-party purposes. And interestingly, one recent new article notes that Article 21 of the Constitution of Japan, which provides that no censorship shall be maintained, nor shall the secrecy of any means of communication be violated, was given significant weight by the EU as part of its determination that Japan has a legislatively equivalent standard of data protection in reaching the mutual adequacy decision. All in all, we took a special approach only to the EU users. That is why GDPR is a local-only approach. But by taking this approach, it has definitely complicated the way we structure our private policy. For example, user flags. If the user agreed to certain privacy policy, we have to keep a different flag for users, and this actually complicates how we manage the users. In summary, the 2 main parts I covered today are the Line Privacy Program is based on global laws and regulations, and therefore GDPR compliance is part and parcel of Line's privacy program, and we did not start from zero. Since Line's privacy program has been cultivating a culture of upholding the privacy of users, it has been relatively easy for our GDPR compliance efforts to be considered and accepted by our shareholders. However, it still proved to be a big ongoing challenge for us to comply with the unique requirements of the GDPR. Before I end my talk today, as I mentioned earlier, I do hope you go and download Line application and start using it. It's definitely better than WhatsApp, trust me. Joking, please don't quote me on that. Thank you very much for your attention today.